If I told you that the human history you were taught is completely wrong, would you believe it? Ancient builders possessed technology that we cannot replicate today. It's not that they were inferior, it's that we have underestimated them so badly. Let me take you through the 10 most incredible archaeological sites on the planet, places where every explanation collapses in the face of the truth and questions without answers. That will make you rethink everything. Non-Madol. Imagine you are sailing across a turquoise lagoon. Suddenly, a strange stone city rises from the water. That was the feeling of the first explorers who set foot here. They could not believe what they were seeing. Stacked columns of dark hexagonal basalt rise one above the other. Each block was shaped by the power of volcanoes. Local people say this place was built by twin sorcerers. They made the stones fly through the air using magic. Non-Madol has 92 artificial islands. All are separated by a network of tidal canals. Many people compare it to Venice, but that comparison is really misleading. Venice was built by one of the wealthiest commercial empires in medieval Europe. Venice had iron, steel, machinery, and abundant manpower. At Non-Madol, none of those things existed. The scale they achieved defies every reasonable estimate. Individual columns in the outer walls weigh up to 50 tons each. One foundation stone here weighs as much as a fully loaded semi-truck. There are tens of thousands of such columns. They are stacked in alternating courses, log cabin style, reaching heights of over 25 feet in many places. The walls still stand. They have survived 8 centuries of massive typhoons and earthquakes and the relentless erosion of salt water. But here is where the standard explanation collapses completely. The basalt did not come from Non-Madol. The quarry sits on the opposite side of Pohnpei Island, separated from the construction site by jungle-choked volcanic terrain. And miles of open ocean, the stones had to be moved. Pohnpei does not have trees large enough to serve as rollers for 50-ton loads. There are no draft animals on the island. There are no records of pulley systems. Moving stone across rugged terrain out to a reef does not exist in any archaeological record. It never existed. Modern engineers visit the site and leave without answers. The people of Pohnpei, when asked, have given the same explanation for 2 centuries. The stones flew. The twin sorcerers, Olisipa and Olisopa, sang them through the air and set them in place. That is also the only answer ever given, and it can explain the evidence still standing on the reef today. Hal Saflieni, the resonance chamber of the Stone Age. In 1902, workers were digging a water cistern at Pola, Malta. They punctured something. But it was not a tomb. It was not a cellar. It was the upper level of a 3-story underground complex, carved directly from the island's bedrock. Hal Saflieni had been waiting in the dark since the Neolithic. Its builders had only antler picks. They had no bronze, no iron, no wheels, no surviving written language, yet they dug deep into the limestone and removed about 2,000 tons of stone by hand. The walls are not rough, they are smooth and curving, finished with such precision that the builders were not just excavating space, they were sculpting it like a work of art above our vaulted ceilings. Carved from a single block of stone, painted with ochre red spirals. These numbers alone would qualify this site for the list. But here is where the mystery becomes truly unsettling. In 2014, acoustic engineers and archaeologists studied a space within the complex. It is called the Oracle Chamber. They wanted to understand why visitors for over a century reported this room produced effects on the body that were hard to explain. Pressure in the chest, a sensation behind the eyes. The feeling that sound spoken into the chamber did not just echo, it occupied the space and refused to leave. The measurements confirmed what visitors had described. The Oracle Chamber resonates at a fundamental frequency of about 110 Hz. Speak into it at that pitch, and the entire room becomes an instrument. The walls amplify your voice. Your skull vibrates, the chamber answers back. 110 Hz is not a random number. Subsequent neurological studies showed that prolonged exposure to sound at this frequency produces measurable shifts in brain activity. This frequency does not relax the brain. It changes the brain's focus in real time. In the most literal sense, this is an acoustic technology for altering consciousness. and it was carved into the bedrock of a Mediterranean island. By people who had not invented the wheel, the implications are staggering. To create a chamber that resonates at a precise frequency, the builders had to control the volume of the space, the curvature of the walls, the density of the surrounding rock, and the geometry of the connecting passages. They had to know, before they began carving, what the finished chamber would sound like. They had to test, they had to revise, they had to understand the relationship between architectural form and acoustic behavior. Modern architects with computer modeling and laser surveys still struggle to intentionally replicate effects with such precision. The Neolithic builders of Hal Saflieni achieved it. With antler and stone, they worked in darkness, 35 feet beneath the surface of the earth. No one knows what this room was used for. No one knows what the spirals on the ceiling were meant to depict. No one knows what voices once spoke into the oracle chamber, or what they expected to hear in return. The builders left no explanation. They left only the room, still resonating, still waiting for the next voice to find the right note. The Yonaguni monument, underwater. In 1985, a diver was looking for a good spot to see tiger sharks. But what he found beneath the blue water was not a shark, it was a wall, a massive structure rising from the seafloor. It had steps and right angles cut into the rock. What they documented has been argued about ever since. The Yonaguni monument rises about 90 feet from the seafloor. Its upper surface lies just beneath the waves, close enough for a diver to touch the top of it and look up at the sun through 10 feet of water. There are channels that look like drainage cuts. There is a depression some divers describe as a carved face. There are shapes that look exactly like staircases, and here is where the problem begins. If the Yonaguni monument was shaped by human hands, it was not shaped recently. The structure sits below modern sea level. The last time that part of the East China Sea floor stood above water was at the end of the last ice age, when global sea levels were as much as 120 meters lower than today. Sea levels rose to their current position about 10,000 years ago. Anything carved into that sandstone before the water arrived would have been carved by people working in the open air during the Ice Age. People who, according to the conventional timeline, were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They had no agriculture, no permanent settlements, and no tradition of monumental stonework. Masaoki Kimura, a marine geologist, spent decades diving the site and mapping its features. His conclusion is that the monument is at least partially man-made. He identified what he interprets as quarry marks, carved channels, and intentional shaping. He argues that Yonaguni is the remnant of a sophisticated culture that existed before the floodwaters came. Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University, dived the same site and reached a different conclusion. He believes sedimentary bedding combined with regional tectonic stress can produce terraces and walls that look engineered, but they are not actually man-made. He sees a striking natural formation. He does not see a building. Both men are credentialed. Both have seen the stone with their own eyes. Both cannot be correct. What makes the Yonaguni question particularly unsettling is the scale of what depends on the answer. If Schoch is right, the monument is a beautiful accident of geology, and the human story remains intact. If Kimura is right, the implications are seismic. Sophisticated stonework would be pushed back into the Ice Age. An entirely new chapter of human capability would have to be inserted into a pre-civilizational period. The builders would have watched their work disappear beneath the rising water, and then they themselves would have vanished from the record, so completely that we cannot say for certain whether they ever existed at all. The stone is still down there. Divers visit it every season. Algae grows back over the terraces, and the answer waits in the dark water. Osireion, the granite temple buried deep underground. There is a structure that does not belong to the chronology Egyptologists have built over 2 centuries. It sits below the surrounding ground level, sunk into the bedrock, like something the desert tried to bury, but failed. Groundwater pools permanently in the lower chambers. Red granite pillars rise from the dark water into parallel rows, weathered by millennia of submersion, their surfaces stained by the slow chemistry of stagnant water. Osireion was built from massive red granite blocks, each weighing up to 100 tons. Quarried at Aswan, over 100 miles up the Nile, and somehow transported, lowered, and assembled in a chamber sunk into the earth. The central hall features 17-foot-tall monolithic pillars, each carved from a single block of granite. These pillars support horizontal granite beams. They span the gaps between columns and weigh dozens of tons themselves. There is no mortar, no decoration on the core structure, no hieroglyphs on the megaliths themselves, no royal insignia claiming credit. Egyptian builders almost never resisted the urge to sign their work. Here, the stones are silent. This construction style is called Cyclopean. It describes structures using stones so massive that later cultures attributed them to giants, because human builders seemed inadequate for the task. The Cyclopean style of Osireion appears nowhere else in dynastic Egyptian architecture. The polished granite blocks fit together with joints identical to those at Sacsayhuamán and Baalbek, sites separated by oceans and supposedly by millennia. The pyramid builders of the 4th dynasty did not build like this. The temple architects of the New Kingdom did not build like this. Osireion stands alone in Egyptian history, surrounded by stylistic relatives that exist only on other continents. This is where the standard chronology begins to fracture. The conventional dating assigns Osireion to Seti I, around 1290 BCE, treating it as a cenotaph honoring the god Osiris, but the structural evidence resists this assignment. Osireion sits dozens of feet below the level of the Seti temple. Its foundations are cut into the bedrock at a depth suggesting it was already ancient when the temple above was planned. The groundwater flooding its lower chambers today did not pool at that level when Seti's architects worked. Some researchers have argued that Osireion's stratigraphic position places it thousands of years before the 1st dynasty, in a pre-dynastic era for which Egypt's official history has no record of monumental construction. The implications are difficult to absorb. If Osireion predates the pharaonic civilization surrounding it, then the Temple of Seti I was built on top of a structure the Egyptians themselves no longer remembered. Seti's architects would have been the latecomers, the inheritors, building a sandstone temple over a granite mystery they could not match. The hieroglyphic record offers no explanation. No king claims Osireion. No inscription names its architects. The 100-ton blocks were dragged from Aswan by people who left no signature, lowered into the earth for reasons no surviving text describes, and abandoned to the slow rise of the water table. The granite is still there. The pillars still hold the beams above the dark water, and the question of who actually built the foundation beneath Egypt's foundation remains unanswered. Puma Punku, the perfect industrial blueprint. The site sits on a barren high plateau where the wind never stops blowing. Andesite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. It rates between 6 and 7 on the mass scale. Harder than iron, hard enough to resist most modern hand tools. To shape it, today's stone masons must use diamond-tipped saws, tungsten carbide bits, and industrial grinders cooled by continuous water flow. Without those tools, andesite resists. It chips, it fractures, it refuses to take a clean edge. Yet the blocks at Puma Punku have perfectly straight cuts, right angles measured to fractions of a degree, surfaces polished to a sheen that catches the high-altitude sun, H-shaped stones with interlocking notches so uniform they look like they were cast from a mold. The blocks were designed to lock together. Each notch on one stone matches a notch on its neighbor, with precision suggesting the entire structure was prefabricated to a master plan, and then assembled like a kit. This is not the work of people learning to work stone. This is the output of a system. But here, the conventional explanations fail. The andesite used at Puma Punku did not originate at Puma Punku. The nearest quarries are 6 to 50 miles away, and the route from quarry to site crosses some of the most punishing mountainous terrain in South America. Steep gradients, loose scree, river crossings, passes that exceed the site's own altitude. And the stones being moved are not small. Some of the largest blocks at Puma Punku exceed 130 tons. A single block weighs more than a fully loaded semi-truck, more than a blue whale cath, more than a small commuter aircraft. They were dragged or transported across miles of rugged Andean landscape by people who, according to the orthodox timeline, had no wheel, no draft animals capable of the task. And no metallurgy beyond working soft copper and bronze. The reddish-brown and grey blocks now lie scattered as if something violent rearranged the site, but the cuts they bear remain pristine. Run your hand along one of the polished surfaces, and it is glass smooth. Bring a straight edge to the right angles, and steel meets stone with no gap. The grooves still hold their parallel walls. The drilled holes still measure identically across blocks separated by tens of meters. Modern stone-cutting specialists who have examined Puma Punku in person, they tend to describe what they see in cautious terms. The cuts appear to require diamond-tipped tools. The polish appears to require abrasive compounds applied under sustained mechanical pressure. None of these things existed according to the accepted record in the Andes of the first millennium CE. None of these things existed anywhere in the Americas before European contact. The site does not contain one anomalous stone, it contains hundreds. The precision is not occasional. It is systemic. Whoever cut these stones did it repeatedly, at scale, with consistency implying an industrial process. All of it has been erased from the record by the centuries that followed. What remains is the stones themselves, scattered across a wine-swept plateau. Holding their impossible angles to the sky, the trilithon at Baalbek, stones heavier than airplanes in the Bekaa Valley of eastern Lebanon. Beneath the Roman ruins of the Temple of Jupiter, there are 3 limestone blocks so massive that no crane operating today can routinely lift them. They are called the trilithon. Each block weighs an estimated 800 tons. They rest in the foundation course of a structure the Romans built in the 1st century CE. But the Romans did not place them there. The trilithon was already in position when Roman engineers arrived. They built their temple on top of a foundation that predated their empire by unknown centuries. The numbers are where the conventional explanations begin to fracture. The 3 blocks of the trilithon were quarried from a site nearly a mile from the temple platform. They were transported uphill across uneven terrain. They were raised more than 20 feet above ground level. A mile away, in the quarry itself, lies something worse. The stone of the pregnant woman still hath embedded in the bedrock where it was cut. A nearby block, discovered in 2014. -1 exceed 1,650 tons. These were not anomalies. This was the working scale of whoever quarried at Baalbek. The largest land-based cranes operating today can theoretically handle loads in the 800-ton range under controlled industrial conditions. They require steel-reinforced ground pads, months of preparation, computer-balanced counterweights, and flat-prepared transport routes. They cannot operate on slopes. They cannot move uphill while loaded. A modern construction firm asked to relocate an 800-ton limestone block uphill a mile and lift it 20 feet into a foundation course would consider the project at the absolute edge of feasibility and would price it in the tens of millions of dollars before the first stone moved. The builders of the trilithon performed this operation 3 times, with 3 blocks, without combustion engines, without hydraulic systems, without steel cables, without any surviving technology in the archaeological record of the region. The Roman explanation repeated for centuries in academic literature holds that Roman engineers used wooden rollers, hemp ropes, and slave labor. The explanation has the comfort of plausibility, but it also has the problem of contradicting Roman engineering itself. Nowhere else in the entire Roman Empire, not in Rome, not in Constantinople, not in any imperial monument, did Roman builders work at this scale. The largest stones in the Colosseum weigh under 10 tons. The largest blocks in the Pantheon weigh under 80 tons. The Romans never again attempted anything close to 800 tons. The trilithon stands as an isolated outlier in their entire architectural history, which suggests strongly that it does not belong to their history at all. What lies beneath the Roman temple is older. How much older is the question no excavation has answered. The Cyclopean masonry style of the trilithon, the regular gargantuan fitted without mortar, matches no Roman construction technique, but resembles megalithic work found at sites separated by oceans and millennia. Whoever placed those 3 blocks understood weight, leverage, and transport at a level modern engineering can barely match. The trilithon is still there. You can stand beside it in the Lebanese sun and place your hand on limestone warmed by the same light for thousands of years. The blocks have not moved, the joints have not separated. The builders are gone. And they left no instructions, no inscriptions. No records, Sacsayhuamán, the walls with no gaps. In 1533, the first Spanish conquistadors rode into the Andean highlands. They encountered a fortress that defied every assumption about what indigenous Americans were capable of. One chronicler compared the construction to the work of demons. He had no other framework to understand it. Sacsayhuamán sits at 12,000 feet above sea level, on a ridge overlooking the former Inca capital. The Incas themselves claimed credit for the structure, and substantial portions of the complex were built during their imperial period in the 15th century. But archaeologists have long noted the lowest and largest courses of stone are stylistically distinct. These cyclopean foundation blocks may predate the Inca. Whoever placed them built at a scale later imperial masons could not match. The largest stones in the lower terraces weigh up to 200 tons. They are limestone and andesite, quarried from sources several kilometers away, hauled uphill to an altitude where the air carries roughly 2/3 the oxygen of sea level, and then shaped into polygonal forms with as many as 12 distinct angles per block, not rectangles, not squares. 12-sided puzzles, each one unique, each fitting perfectly against its neighbors. Every angle of every stone corresponds to a complementary angle on the adjacent stone. The blocks do not simply rest against each other. They interlock. A razor blade cannot fit between them. This claim is repeated by every researcher who has visited the site. It is not an exaggeration, it is a measurable fact. Modern stonemasons with diamond saws and laser measurement systems. They have tried to replicate a single Sacsayhuamán joint under controlled conditions and have failed to achieve the tolerance present across tens of thousands of square meters of ancient wall. Engineers have calculated the precision of the joints achieves tolerances under 1 mm. Achieving this fit on a single block on a workshop floor takes a modern mason days. The builders of Sacsayhuamán did it thousands of times, on stones weighing as much as a fully loaded tractor trailer, on the side of a mountain. But here, the conventional explanations fail. The standard model proposes Andean stonemasons shaped the blocks through patient abrasion, fitting each one to its neighbor through trial and error grinding. This model seems plausible for individual stones, but it collapses when applied to the wall as a whole. A 200-ton block cannot be repeatedly lifted, lowered, marked, lifted again, ground down, and replaced. The energy cost is prohibitive. The required handling infrastructure leaves no archaeological trace, and the finished surfaces show none of the tool marks that abrasion fitting would inevitably leave. Stonehenge, the mysterious stone circle on the plain, on Salisbury Plain in southern England. A ring of towering grey sandstone pillars stands weathered. Lichen has covered them over time, casting long shadows across the chalk grassland. But familiarity is not understanding. The longer engineers examine what was actually accomplished on this plain, the more the monument resists the casual glance it has been given for centuries. Construction began around 3000 BC. The largest stones were erected around 2500 BC, 500 years into a building project spanning generations. The Sacsayhuamán blocks weigh up to 25 tons each. They were quarried from a site roughly 20 miles north of the plain and dragged across woodland, marsh and river valley by a population with neither the wheel nor draft animals. 25 tons is the weight of 4 adult African elephants. The Neolithic builders moved dozens of them. But the Sacsayhuamán are only half the problem. The blue stones weigh roughly 4 tons each. They were transported over 150 miles from Western Wales, not across flat terrain, but across mountains, across rivers, across the Bristol Channel. 4 tons is the weight of a small truck. They moved about 80 of these stones across a third of the island of Britain, using ropes, wooden sledges, and human muscle. The standard explanation invokes log rollers and large coordinated labor forces. The mathematics of these models produce timelines stretching into decades for a single stone. The geography produces obstacles with no convincing solution. The Severn estuary alone presents a crossing problem that has defeated every reconstruction attempt. Scaling that effort to 80 stones produces numbers that strain belief. But here is where the engineering problem becomes genuinely strange. The horizontal lintels are not simply laid across the uprights. They are locked in place using mortise and tenon joints, projections on the uprights fitting precisely into hollows carved into the lintels. This is a woodworking technique. It belongs to carpentry, developed for material that yields easily to a blade. The Stonehenge builders applied it to sandstone. They carved mortises and tenons into multi-ton megaliths, and then raised them into the air and dropped them onto their mating partners, with enough accuracy that the joints engaged on the first attempt. There is no margin for error when the workpiece weighs 25 tons. The lintels themselves are curved along their length to follow the circumference of the ring. The entire upper ring is effectively a single continuous stone hoop, assembled from individually shaped pieces, each fitted to its neighbors with precision, betraying planning at a massive scale. And then there is the alignment. The monument is oriented to the summer and winter solstice sunrises, with accuracy requiring sustained astronomical observation across multiple generations. They knew where the sun would rise on the longest and shortest days. They knew it precisely enough to bury that knowledge in the geometry of a 25-ton ring of stone, where it has remained legible for 5,000 years. What makes Stonehenge particularly unsettling is its location in the timeline. This is not a fringe site. This is one of the most studied monuments on Earth, and the basic logistical questions have never been answered. The blue stones reached Salisbury Plain, the mortise and tenon joints engaged. The solstice alignments held, the builders are gone, and the methods went with them, and the ring still stands on the chalk. In the rain, huge and silent, refusing to explain itself. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the precise machine of the desert. The pyramid waited longer than recorded history. Its age is beyond comprehension. The numbers are where the dread begins. 2.3 million blocks. The largest among them are granite slabs forming the chambers above the king's chamber, each weighing up to 80 tons. That granite was not local. It was quarried at Aswan, over 500 miles away, then transported the length of Egypt, then raised hundreds of feet into the air, then positioned with perfect care inside a structure already rising around them, 80 tons, the weight of roughly 80 modern cars. Lifted by means we still cannot satisfactorily explain, hundreds of feet above the desert floor, and slotted into a chamber buried inside a mountain of stone. The standard explanations involve ramps. Straight ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps. Each model resolves some logistical problems, but creates others. A ramp tall enough to deliver an 80-ton block to the king's chamber would itself require a construction project rivaling the pyramid. A spiral ramp wrapped around the exterior would obscure the corner alignments. No surviving record describes the construction method. No engineering treatise, no foreman's notes. The largest stone structure of the ancient world was built, and its builders left no instructions. But here is where the standard explanations fail. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. Not magnetic north, but true north, the geographic pole defined by Earth's axis of rotation. That alignment is more accurate than many modern observatories. It is more accurate than the Meridian building at Greenwich, achieving 0.5-degree accuracy on a structure covering 13 acres. Requires either astronomical observation of extraordinary sophistication or surveying instruments that have left no trace. They locked their monument to the planet's rotational axis, with an error margin smaller than the width of a thumb. The casing stones compound the impossibility. Originally, the pyramid was sheathed in 144,000 polished white limestone blocks, each cut to mate with its neighbors at tolerances reported in fractions of a millimeter. Sunrise on the Giza Plateau would have set the entire structure ablaze. A 481-foot mirror, visible from the hills of the Sinai. Medieval earthquakes loosened the casing. Medieval builders stripped most of what remained. What survives at the base of the pyramid still shows joints so fine a knife edge cannot enter them. Limestone shaped by copper tools and stone hammers. Fitted across millions of square feet of surface with precision modern masonry rarely attempts. And there is no surviving record of how any of it was done. The Egyptians documented exhaustively. They recorded grain shipments. The pyramid stands. The method does not. We assume the builders worked at the edge of their capability. We assume the Great Pyramid represents the absolute ceiling of 26th century BC Egypt, but there is no evidence for that ceiling, only the structure, and for 1,500 years of silence. The pyramid sits on the Giza Plateau in the present tense, still aligned, still precise, still refusing to explain itself. And if Giza is the upper limit of what we are willing to believe, then the next entry will demand we move that limit. By 7,000 years, Göbekli Tepe, the world's oldest temple, rewrites history. In 1994, a shepherd in southeastern Turkey. He noticed something strange protruding from the soil. It was the rounded top of a limestone pillar, weathered, but unmistakably shaped by human hands. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt arrived to investigate, what he found beneath that hillside would dismantle the timeline of human civilization. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It sits on a limestone ridge above the Harran Plain, 22 acres of buried architecture. Ground-penetrating radar surveys identified at least 20 circular enclosures. Fewer than a dozen have been excavated. Each enclosure is ringed by T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing 18 feet tall, the largest weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are carved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, serpents, and lions, rendered with stylistic confidence that later civilizations took millennia to develop. Radiocarbon dating returned a number that stopped excavators cold. Approximately 9,600 BCE, the site predates Stonehenge by roughly 7,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates the invention of pottery, writing, and the wheel, and the domestication of every staple grain. This was not built by farmers, it was built by hunter-gatherers. The implications got the standard model. For over a century, archaeologists have taught a clean sequence: agriculture comes first, then settlement, then surplus, then specialization, then monumental architecture. You cannot build 20-ton stone pillars until you have a society stable enough. Göbekli Tepe reverses the sequence. The temple came before the farm, the monument came before the village. Whatever drove these nomadic peoples to quarry and erect 20-ton T-shaped pillars. It was not the surplus of agriculture, it was something else, something we have no name for. But here is where the standard explanation collapses completely. The pillars were quarried using stone tools. No metal implements existed at this date anywhere on Earth. No evidence of pulleys, no evidence of wheels. No draft animals trained for hauling. The nearest quarry sits several hundred meters from the enclosures, and the limestone bedrock there shows clear extraction scars. How nomadic bands moved 20-ton pillars across uneven terrain and lifted them into vertical position remains in the precise language of published excavation reports and explained. And then there is the final fact. Around 8,000 BCE, 16 centuries after construction began, the builders of Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried their own site. Not abandoned, not destroyed, they buried it. They filled every enclosure with tons of soil and rubble, carrying it up the ridge basket by basket, until the pillars disappeared beneath an artificial hill where the fill came from. Remains unknown. Why they did it remains unknown. What they were sealing in is a question the stones do not answer. The carved foxes still watch from the limestone. The vultures still spread their wings across the pillars. Klaus Schmidt died in 2014, before he could open them. They sit beneath the Turkish soil exactly where their builders left them, waiting for the moment when we are finally ready to ask the questions they may have left for us. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen right now. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel.